Niccolo Machiavelli is one of the most controversial figures of all time, a political theorist and philosopher who is famously known for writing The Prince in the early 1500s. He himself worked as a civil servant for the Republic state of Florence after the fall of the Medici's family's control over it. However, they would later on once again gain control of Florence. And this is at a time after the Roman Empire has fallen. And Machiavelli, as a student of history and political theory, shares his thoughts in this book on, more than anything, a modern version of the art of war. Many consider Machiavelli to be a controversial figure, and the term Machiavellian even being termed for his outlook on the world and politics of a game theorizing about nation states and how to strategize both militarily as well as politically to maintain and gain control over peoples and states. Now, not knowing Niccolo Machiavelli or his person, his personal morals, I would consider him to be a realist. For instance, he sees that a state governed by Christian morals is bound to fail, because there are things in order to maintain control over a state that a prince has to do that are counter Christian morals. I mean, you can think of the act of war even as being something that many Christians would argue is counter Christian morals. So that's something that I would not make the judgment of his character on, but simply seeing the reality of how states have ran and how they have maintained power and affluence throughout history, and finding the things that work and the things that don't work. And the way that Machiavelli spends the first section of this book is by showing how different princes come into power and ways that they can maintain it. So you have princes, for instance, who come to power simply because of royal heritage. Then you have those who, by means of excellence in their field or even some political gaming of their own, work their way up into power. And it is for these individuals who it's more difficult in order to maintain power in a already formed structure of government, because you need to win the favor over not only of the elites in power, but also the people. This is why Machiavelli says when conquering another country or another principality, it's best to either completely take them out or else enslave them, because of how difficult it is to try and get the already established structure to honor the new prince. The thing that is emphasized above all else in The Prince, though, is having a strong army. And there are 3 different types of armies that a prince can have. You can have your own army built up of the people of your principality. You can have an auxiliary army that is an army that is just your allies. So, for instance, people of Florence at one point had help from France to fight their battles. And then the third type of army are mercenaries. That is men of no allegiance to any nation, but arms for hire, essentially. He discourages the latter two and says that a prince should have their own army, because an auxiliary army is likely to, after helping you, take over your state, and a mercenary army is not going to fight very hard for you. They're going to be less likely to put their lives at risk, and once again, they will be more likely to bite you in the back after you pay them out, or even before you pay them out. If there's a higher bidder out there, then you might just lose out to a higher bidder. And one of my favorite parts of the book is what has been very well established in pop culture from things like The Office, of whether it is better to be loved or feared.
Would I rather be feared or loved? Easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
And Machiavelli's answer to that question, unlike Michael Scott, is it is better to be feared than it is to be loved. For the reasoning of being feared rather than loved, he says that men love of their own free will, but are inspired with fear by the will of the prince. A wise prince should always rely upon himself and not upon the will of others. However, he caveats this whole point by saying also that a prince should never be hated by his own people. So you do need to have a measured cruelty, if you will, and not be a complete dictator if you want to continue to have that balance of being respected and loved while also not being seen as just a effeminate pushover. And one of the examples of this is punishing a few people when there is disorder and chaos in a principality rather than punishing all the people. So you show your hand as the authority in that way without gaining the hate of everybody, and establish order and consequences and standards. And to the critiques of a Machiavelli, I think that we often conflate the morals between individuals with morals of people groups, because there are things, many examples that you could come up with of things that would be considered immoral on an individual basis, yet is the only means of survival and longevity for a nation state or a people. And where that line is very gray and still debated to this day as to what is just and what is fair. And at the end of the day, these are almost the questions of God. You know, these are the things that only God knows. But unfortunately, we as humans do need to figure these things out, and whether it's right or wrong, we will know in the final analysis. But it is something that is worth studying. The thoughts of Machiavelli, his book The Prince, books like The Art of War, these are things worth studying because this is the reality of history. And, you know, what's the old adage of history is doomed to repeat itself if we don't remember or if we forget? So it's best and wise to be studied on these things and not make the same mistakes that our ancestors made. I'll end with this quote here at the very end of Machiavelli's The Prince. He says, "Virtue against fury shall advance the fight, and it in the combat soon shall put to flight. For the old Roman valor is not dead, nor in the Italian's breast extinguished." Let me know if you have read The Prince and what your thoughts are on it, as well as any other books that you would like me to read next time. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and I hope to see you next time. God bless.